This episode is sponsored by Linode. Do you need a Linux server for your latest creation? Then check them out. They provide native SSD storage, 200 gigabit per second network connections, Intel E5 processors, and top-of-the-line hardware to run your servers on. It deploys Linux in seconds from a Linode cloud, and you can choose your Linux distribution and node location right from the manager. They have locations in Asia, North America, and Europe, and a sweet set of tools to make it easy to manage it. If the web interface isn't your thing, they also have an API and a command line. They also provide two-factor authentication, IPv6, DNS manager, plumbing, scaling, and everything else you would want. So get the most out of your Linux node by checking them out at linode.com or devchat.tv/linode. Hello and welcome to React Native Radio, episode 88. I'm your host, Nader Dabit. Today on our panel, we have Spencer Carley.
Hey there.
Gant Laborde.
Welcome, friends.
Mike Grabowski of Callstack.
Hello, everyone.
And our topic today is how to get a job or how to get a contract and be a freelancer working in React and React Native in particular, but really in general. And so like if you're not a React Native developer, if you're just like a developer or whatever, hopefully this stuff will also apply to you. And to talk about this, a lot of us have some experience as panelists in our day-to-day experiences and things like that. But we've brought on special guest Lee Johson, who is also a panelist sometimes, and Dave Sibiski. They work for a company called G2i. And I just want to go ahead and welcome them to the show. Welcome to the show, guys.
What's up?
Hey, thanks, guys. Good to be here.
Yeah, good to have you. I think this is a perfect panel because you guys, we were just talking about this before the show. You know, you do this for a living, and then Spencer Carley, who's, on as a panelist, he has a newsletter, Work React Native. So, he deals with this stuff in a lot, just putting that newsletter together, talking to people. And then me and Gant, have a lot of experience as either consultants or, working with React in general over the last couple of years. But before we kind of get too deep into anything else, can you talk about G2i for a second and what you all do?
Sure. I can take that one if you want, Dave. We vet talent and find contracts and full-time placements. So we have a whole process of getting applicants in and go through a pretty rigorous process to verify your level. We focus on React Native. We do some Android and iOS and other things too, but we really focus on React and React Native. And so once someone goes through our process, when we find a contract for the freelancers or a full-time placement, the people running that contract know that the candidates that we send have already been vetted. They've gone through a test, they've gone through a technical interview, and it's a pretty deep one. So they skip a lot of the pre-process, and then they just kind of have the culture interviews and start work.
So what kind of things that does your company build? Are you building particularly like large applications? Are you working with startups? Are you working with enterprise companies? Like what's your typical customer?
Yeah, so there's a lot of Y Combinator for the contract freelance work. We have some really good connections and know some great people there. So a lot of the contracts are that, and then it kind of recommendations, and it varies really. For the full-time placements, they're bigger companies. Coinbase is a good example. We're filling up 2 positions at Coinbase right now in San Francisco. So the contracts they really do vary, and they vary in length from 10, 12 weeks to 6 months to some that are just ongoing for quite a while.
So what does it take to get hired at Coinbase? What kind of developers are they looking for?
Mid, senior, and higher. They want team leads. They're looking for 2 team leads in the specifically React space. One for some internal tools that they use, and one for the customer facing. Has to have experience in React. And what's tricky about that, obviously, is React Native have not been around that long. So what we do is when we do our process, we ask a lot of specific React questions, and we have a very specific code challenge that we do that covers the whole. It's small, but it covers an entire React application. And there's a lot of things that we specifically look for in that around best practices. So you have to pass that and get a certain, score, and score high enough to be considered a senior developer. And so they're looking for senior developer team lead for smaller teams. They're breaking up into smaller teams to focus on different features.
That's awesome. Do you have to update that test like every 5 minutes, like as React updates?
Well, I think I let Dave weigh in on this because he does a lot of the scoring and stuff. So I made the test and I tried to create it so that it hit the specific ideas of React and React, but it doesn't matter if you use Redux, but you should use a state management of some
Gotcha.
kind, that kind of thing. So it's
Okay,
we didn't try to pigeonhole into any specific thing because that stuff comes and goes. But there are very specific practices for just good programming, but good programming in the React ecosystem.
Yeah, for a little bit of time, we did have a project that was already kind of pre-built, and you had to kind of get into it and work on a couple issues, fix a couple things, add some new things, and that was pretty much that was a problem. We had a lot of issues with it breaking, or even some certain bugs that we had there. React Native updates were fixing them, so we kind of went a different route with the new challenge that Lee came up with. So it's just more open. So pretty much the candidate has to kind of start from scratch. So that helps a lot there.
So this is something that's going to be a good question for both Mike and G2i. When you're hiring, do you work mainly with companies that are looking for full-time developers, and how does that work as far as placement, and what are they looking for in a developer in that scenario? And then also with contractors or freelancers, and what does that whole thing look like?
Okay, well, I can jump in there if nobody else wants to take it. So you're talking about what do you look for full-time and for contract employees?
Yeah, if someone's looking for a contractor versus a full-time employee, what would be the circumstances there, and why would they be looking for a contractor versus a full-time employee, and what does the skill set, I guess, look like between the two, or are they exactly the same?
Sure. So, and contracting, a big reason with contracting, especially in React and React Native, is because, basically, I guess, two reasons. You're under a tight deadline and you need some accelerated help for a short time, or you don't have the expertise and you need some of the expertise for a short time. Especially in a React Native environment where it's maybe a focused app and you want to build it and then internally maintain it, or it's a project, so it's a project basis. We do have a lot of projects going where the customer just doesn't have the React Native experience. They want someone that does, and they're kind of learning through the process with the experienced developers. So their developers come in, they build the product. The in-house developers participate in all of it and just kind of learn as they go and try to maybe pick small components to work on. They're experienced developers. They just aren't experienced with React Native, and most likely they have some React experience. So it's kind of a double benefit for them in that they can make progress, get their app made, and kind of learn at the same time. And the flip side of that for the contracting is that there's something that they need to build, and they don't either have the manpower or they don't really have the expertise in React. So they add some horsepower to the process to get it done quicker. And so those are usually for short stints, and that's a big reason why when we do the process, we really focus on the React Native skills. We try not to even worry about years of experience or resume or any of that kind of stuff, because you really just need to be a good craftsman, right? So we test those things, and those are the things that we make sure that works well. Some customers require a certain amount of experience in certain things, but generally, especially for the contract work, they just want to be sure that the person can come in, hit the ground running, and start making progress. And so that's kind of what we focus on there. And I'll let somebody else speak to the full-time side.
Well, actually, I have a couple questions. That's really interesting because, as a person kind of joins another group as a craftsman, and that they're really good at what they're working on. Have you ever, and this is just sort of hey, the meta stuff of being a programmer, have you ever had it where that person also needs certain management skills, or they need to fit into that company's sort of workflow in a different way? Do you have to have the skills and then perhaps have some kind of interfacing set up as well? Because I found sometimes you can find people who are two technological matches. And then what's funny is there's a lot of humanity between those two things that make those gears not fit. Do you see that a lot, or is it usually as long as you have somebody who cares about the craft, they tend to fit well?
Yeah, for contracts, they typically aren't looking for more of the management thing usually, and it's more they need somebody that just really does great work. And so what we also do is we don't get in the way. Those developers are placed directly on that team. They are on the stand-ups. There's no middleman. There's no because that just slows progress down, and it muddies the communication if there's a in-between person. So it's a direct inject right there on your team. And then we also have the very first part of our process is kind of a personality discussion. To see is this person friendly? Can they work well with others? And then that's the very first thing. And then when we send them send profiles to a contract, for example, send several profiles, there's one of those discussions. It's not really technical, but they have a face-to-face over video chat with each developer and then decide after that. So there's a little bit, there's a little bit of meet and greet involved in the whole process, just to make sure everybody kind of gets along.
Yeah, and sometimes I think to try to see a little bit if there's a culture fit. We might know a little about the company that's hiring and get a little information from them on kind of what they're looking for. Maybe ask a few preliminary questions in that first interview that Lee was talking about. But really, like he said, ultimately the company will kind of try to verify, is this person really going to fit for our culture when they kind of get face to face with them.
Like at Callstack, we've been sort of working in a very similar way to you all. To be honest, from our perspective, what we've observed over time is that for our clients, the most important and crucial, let's say, thing is that developers that join teams are sort of excited about the product they are working on, and they feel like they know what they are doing. So part of the process that we have is kind of similar to you, which is making sure that the team that is going to join the client team is sort of having similar interests, in a way that if we are, for instance, working on a gaming app, the team is sort of into gaming, which proves to be a good decision because usually it ends up with developers being more motivated and working on the product, and then the client being more happy with the results he's getting. So I feel like this is also one of the sort of important things to make sure in that process.
So I guess another way to look at this is like coming from a developer's standpoint, and I know like a lot of us have been in this situation where we're looking for contracts or we're looking for a job. What have people found valuable or useful when looking for a job? And like, what are the trade-offs between taking a full-time job versus being a consultant? Spencer, I know you've done some consulting. I might let you start with this one.
Yeah, I think one of the big trade-offs I see with consulting versus free time or versus a full-time position, for me, like, it's really, really important to kind of like all of you guys were saying, like find something there's a cultural fit or like just an interest fit. Like I'm not big into gaming, so that's not something I would necessarily be interested in. So that's something I have to weigh in to that conversation. And then, also trying to figure out how do I interact with, the team? Is it a technical team already? Is it just kind of a, co-founders I'm interacting with? What's that team dynamic? How do I actually play into that dynamic? And then the biggest thing that I've noticed over the last year or so since I kind of left like a long-term 2-year contracting gig where it was just the same thing month after month was basically as you're kind of vetting different clients, one, that takes a lot of time to talk to different clients, just kind of, meet and greet each other and just kind of build that relationship. So there's a lot of non-technical things that you're going to have to do between actual like writing code. So something that I find a lot of people struggle with that I've spoken to developers kind of leaving a full-time gig or just getting into contracting for a side, like a side business. There's going to be gaps in income that if you've only done full-time work or you've done full-time work primarily for a while, these gaps in income can be a little bit scary for some people, especially if you're not used to that. You're kind of used to that, every 2 weeks you get your paycheck where, there might be a month where you don't necessarily get that. So when I was talking to someone a few weeks ago about wanting to do some contracting work, it was important for me to remind them that if you're going to be doing contracting or consulting, basically your rates are going to be a lot higher or relatively higher than if you're your full-time equivalent. And that's kind of to compensate for those gaps between contracts when those happen, and then also to take care of all the non-development stuff you're doing, all the stuff that's not directly billed for. So there's a lot more considerations I found when you're going the consulting route, purely consulting, which kind of brings things, like G2i makes things really easy. And like I used to work with a company that did something similar, or even going the route of Upwork, and just kind of like having almost that middleman that will find and help you build that relationship versus you having to do the development and all those other things, as well as, building those relationships.
Yeah, I completely agree. And actually that's how I started at G2i. I was doing freelance work and just did not want to find my next contract. I had enough, just the work itself was plenty for me. So I just didn't want to do the rest of the stuff. And I knew the contract I was on had about a month or two left, possibly extended, possibly not. So I went through the G2i process and actually was doing some internal work, working on code reviews, interviewing people kind of to help out. And we all got along really well. It fit with the stuff that I like to do. So they offered me the CTO role, and I took it for exactly the same reasons that you just said. Freelancing was great, and I wasn't looking for a job personally, but I just found a fit. And you definitely do make more freelancing, but you have more expenses, you have, taxes, there's reasons for that.
Yeah, taxes is another good one. My first year contracting, I was surprised at the difference in taxes there. Definitely prepare for that one and do some research to make sure you're setting things aside properly, paying your quarterly taxes, because that can come back to bite you and make tax day that much more fun.
To be honest, what I appreciated over time was that I decided to hire a qualified person to take care of my taxes. She was just doing all the stuff, writing down all the invoices and filling in the documents for the tax office. So to be honest, I didn't have to even think about having my own company because everything has been done by other people, and I could have just focused on coding. So it pretty much felt like working full time. I think I sort of went the other direction because back in the day I used to be full-time employed working on the React Native app. So to be honest, from a React developer perspective, I used to be quite happy. And I've been working remotely, so let's say that the financial aspect was also good. And then I started working sort of as a consultant part-time, mainly because I was sort of looking for, let's say, non-trivial use cases to fix with React, because I've been sort of bored with working in a regular full-time app maintenance. And so I liked it so much that we decided to set up a company around that concept. So that's been like how we sort of decided to make a company out of it, which is sort of bringing us to the same point, because then from the company we created that environment for others. And that was the moment when I realized all those risks that go with being a consultant, which is not just the gaps between the projects, but also things like your retirement in the future, and what happens when you're sick, for instance, and also understanding the sort of hourly rates model, where you might just work for 6 hours rather than 8 because there is not enough work. I've seen people having different understanding on that topic as well. So being a consultant is hard in that space, that you not just have to be a developer, but also focus on all those different aspects, like how to sell your product and also how to negotiate the terms with the client, because many of them are educated, especially those that I met within the React Native community. They tend to be sort of educated in that space, but you may end up working with someone that has a different understanding of how the consultancy corporation should look like. And that's where you should have enough expertise to be able to do it on your own. Because if you don't have it or you don't feel comfortable with that for some reason, then you may feel a bit lost, and sort of focus on things not related to coding, which is probably not something that you are looking for.
Yeah, plus one on that, get somebody else to do your taxes. When you're doing your own consulting, especially if you're just starting out and you're not employed with somebody, you have a ridiculous amount of tax write-offs. I'm not sure, how that plays out around the world, but specifically in the States, if you generally you can make about 30% of your wages just from tax savings, as long as you're playing the game correctly. And that means having somebody who knows what they're doing, taking care of it, not you. And then you could focus, just like Mike said, you want to focus on building your own profile or the company profile and building projects and working on technology that you like.
Yeah, and I found like if you're trying to find what your rate is as a consultant or as a freelancer, I would take the amount of money that you were making at your last job and multiply that by 2 and then find out what that hourly rate would be in a 40-hour week. And then you might be in a good position because I know that companies look at hiring consultants in the same light. So if they have a job that they may have paid $80,000 a year for, they'd be willing to pay double that to bring in a consultant for a short amount of time because they have less things to worry about as far as overhead. They don't normally typically have to buy insurance. They don't have to have a lot of the like onboarding and when they're bringing a consultant, they're usually getting a specialist. They don't have to take that first few months of kind of maybe training or maybe they'll train you a little bit on particulars within the company, but you're typically expected to come on pretty quickly. And there's actually a book that I'm going to have as my pick. It's called The Nomadic Developer, and it basically is an entire book about how to, I guess, become a consultant, and it's specifically around technology and software, and it goes into a lot of about pricing and how to price and why pricing is done a particular way. And it's been one of my favorite books, and it kind of goes into a lot of this stuff. So,
just coming back to the insurance that you mentioned, that reminds me of one sort of historical situation that I had where I was sort of required to have an insurance myself as a self-employed company, just in case, for instance, in let's say that I break my arm and I can't code for, let's say, next week or next month. That will be causing some issues for the company that decided to contract me, and so they wanted me to be insured for that case. That was sort of weird. I wasn't sure whether that's a standard or not. So my suggestion would be to sort of don't be afraid to ask your friends and the community itself whether this is a good practice or not, because I've seen a lot of weird things over time, and sometimes you may be feeling like it's just too stupid to ask and agreeing on something that you shouldn't be. And the other thing that I really like about consulting is that like the real consulting with people, private entities rather than companies. So rather than being a consultant, say for a Callstack, just being a consultant for an entrepreneur somewhere in Bay Area, for instance. That's, for instance, the path that I went. And I sort of appreciated, not just because I had the opportunity to be sort of a CTO of a startup, but also to sort of learn the product attitude, working directly with a person that is sort of inviting the product itself. So it felt like, building the relationship, the true relationship with that person. And even though he's been paying me well for the time that I was spending on the product, I pretty much felt like the founder of this product. So that's been pretty fun for me. And if you are sort of having this startup attitude somewhere deep in your heart, maybe that's also the route that you should consider. There are hundreds of people that are looking for React Native help within the community, and they can't afford hiring like a fully fledged consultancy because they just have a small budget, which might be fine for you because obviously you as a consultant will have a more competitive sort of offerings because you don't have that all business overhead sort of bundle in with your rates.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, on the developer side too, one thing I thought about was we also are able to get non-US based developers, React Native developers involved, and some pretty great US companies, contract startups, which I think is pretty cool. Things that they probably wouldn't know about any other way, but because we meet, and we get applications all over the world. And specifically, South America works really well because of the time zone matches really well with the U.S. And we have contracts outside the U.S., but there's a lot of U.S.-based contracts, and being able to offer a developer from South America a chance to work on a startup project in San Francisco, and the rate is favorable to the developer. So that's pretty cool too. That's another neat aspect of it.
So what has been valuable as a kind of career philosophy or career move when getting jobs and getting hired and getting noticed? Like, I guess this comes more about a developer like listening to the show that wants to get hired and be able to charge the rates that will allow them, higher than average lifestyle or the higher than average rate, I guess. So, Gant, what would your recommendation be if someone's listening and they're like, they want to like maybe take their career or their rates to the next level? Like, what would they need to do, in your opinion, to get noticed and to get taken seriously.
Yeah, far too often people look at consulting as sort of like a binary flip, right? It's sort of the engineers and all of us saying like, okay, well now I'm a consultant, right? Anything's only ever worth what somebody's willing to pay for it. Same thing happens in property. It happens in marketing. It happens in consulting. So to unfortunately jump straight into this cliche, we're all building a brand. Natter, you're very, very good at that. I see your name in all kinds of places. As a matter of fact, everybody here, I was just about to go through the list and say what each person's done right, but every person on this panel can be found, can be identified, understands how they look to the outside world. And then as these accolades begin to sort of like build up, what somebody is willing to pay is going to continue to go up. And as people are, as you get more sought after, generally what I found is, people want to work with Callstack, right? People want to work with InvidRed. People want to work with UNAT. They want to work, they want to learn, they want to train, they want to work with, they want to get people placed because the success stories come back and then they end up on the G2i website. And I think that's this is the feedback loop that sort of gives social proof. It gives consistency. It gives sort of things that as a person, you feel okay paying more, knowing you're getting more. If you went to the store tomorrow and you looked at all the lists of, phones and you had no idea which one's best, you just knew the prices, you'd go do some research. And then providing that kind of research, providing that sort of availability, a person can properly choose you. Would you agree? Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you, and sort of what I could add to this answer is that in order to get not only more traction but also to sort of take your rates to the next level, which is also the sales technique that we use at Callstack, is to basically do open source. Because what I found, especially as being a consultant out of Europe, many times when I was offering the rates that I really wanted. Because say I had a full-time job, right? So in order to get my hands onto coding after work, it had to be real money that would actually make me, sort of motivated to do it. And so when people were hearing the raise that I wanted to get, many times I've been hearing that, you guys, you crazy because you're out of Europe and, obviously that's a different market, different prices, and you don't have dollars, you have zloty, which is a local currency, which is 3 times cheaper than dollar. So all that crap, and then when I started doing open source, when I started building some credibility in the community, all these sort of questions and discussions ended up, because basically people started really appreciating the expertise and the open source record that I had to show. So say they had some issues with the library that I was contributing to, that was easy win for me, because even if they were unhappy with the rates or had some objections as far as my time zone and stuff, I just could have let them know that, okay, that you can't find a better person for this particular job because I'm on the team in this project, right? So from my perspective, the most successful technique for being a consultant, which also worked for my friend Alexei, that's been with me on RMPM, was to basically do open source. And that's where it all started for us.
Plus one on that. That's a good call.
Yeah, I think too, just speaking a little bit to kind of a little more specific on kind of the technical side of what you know and what you do. Excuse me. Maybe a lot of people that maybe are just starting out too, perhaps they've done projects here and there and they've kind of maybe worked on their own personal stuff. But I think it's important. It's something that we definitely look to, in the developers that we're vetting is, do they know why they're doing things in their programming or in their coding instead of just kind of doing them? And sometimes it's a simple thing, like even just knowing, why are you using triple equal sign versus double equal sign, right, in JavaScript? Things like that, kind of moving on from just kind of being able to execute something where you can just kind of get something out there, which of course is definitely the first step. It's extremely valuable to be able to put a working product out there for your client, right? But then as you want to progress, if you want to really be able to charge greater prices, you need to kind of also understand the languages that you're using, not just the frameworks, but how it all ties together. Why are you doing things? And also getting to the point where you have experience with deploying and putting things in the app stores or out in production. Those are things that we find a lot of clients really, really are looking for. Not just someone who can kind of build an app, but they need someone who can take it from, where it's been built to now where it's gone through the App Store review. It's actually in the hands of customers, and there's everything that you would expect a production app to have is there, collecting insights and all those things for them. And so kind of, even if you don't have any professional experience yet, doing more than just kind of personal pet projects that you just kind of just throw in your GitHub repository, see if you can try to take something and put it out into production. And that's real actual experience that's gonna help you to be able to say, look, I've been able to do this. Maybe even I haven't worked for a big company or a lot of companies that have actually paid me to do this, but this is what I have done. And that kind of speaks a lot to, again, the kind of experience level goes beyond just how many years you've worked for XYZ company.
So that's really good information. That's really interesting because I think there's a good combination of expertise that you need to have, and you also need to be able to kind of show people that you're able to do these things. So like if someone knows how to do this stuff, how can they be found, I guess? Like, you say that people want these type of developers. The problem is there are millions of developers out there looking to land these positions. How do you kind of filter them out? I know, Gant, you were talking about branding yourself or getting yourself known, and then Mike was talking about open source. Like, what would be a good just strategy to kind of combine all of this stuff and someone listening to kind of lay out maybe a plan over the next year? What can they do this year to kind of to do all of these things and actually execute on all this stuff?
Yeah, I'll do a quick blurb and then see what you were thinking. And I would just say kind of what you described is kind of why G2i exists and how it morphed into that is for that very problem. Like how do the companies find the developers that know what they're doing? How do developers find the companies, and and the whole process? And we offer bounties for open source contribution. So if somebody has an open source idea or wants to contribute to open source, we pay them. Right? We get money for that. So that helps exactly what you guys have been talking about. It helps that process. Blog posts, sponsored blog posts, things like that help too to get that name out there, and just for the experience. And then, you have training, which I know Spencer and Nader know a lot about that. I mean, getting training in the area to become better and go through a training process also helps a lot.
Yeah, I agree. You get in over your head, and honestly, if you're passionate about this, you'll find out, and you'll get your head above water, and you'll start figuring out how to swim. If you're not passionate about it, it's better to find out early and find something else. I think that Mike was saying you find developers who are passionate about their projects, and I couldn't agree more. That blade cuts both ways. Sometimes people, developers are known to be divas, but it's a creative art, so you have to care.
Yeah, on the front of branding, one thing I would consider, I would love to contribute to open source more, but I know personally, I can feel intimidated contributing to open source. There's something I've gone and done that's worked really well for me to build my brand and kind of just have a healthy stream of consulting is creating tutorials or just kind of writing about whatever I'm doing. Like half the time I write something, I don't really know what I'm doing. So for example, I wrote a blog post on using the flat list in React Native that, it has tens and tens of thousands of views. But the reality is the reason I wrote that wasn't to, describe how the flat list works and everything. It was for me to better understand how that flat list works. And I do this in a lot of different things, and it works well. And something else that happens on these blog posts is people will ask, why did you do this? Why did you do that? What about, this situation? And then as these comments, build up and you're responding to them, it's deepening your knowledge and kind of, if someone comes across that, as you're kind of answering these questions and improving your knowledge, you're then demonstrating your that you actually know this component or this API, whatever it may be. But you're also demonstrating that, you're able to kind of figure things out on your own. And that's something I found a lot with a few developers I've interacted with, is just how important it is to have the confidence and the ability to actually, just kind of dive into things, dive into the source code and really start to understand how and why things work the way they do. And I think that gives you a lot of leverage, depending on who you're talking with, who you want to work with. But just having that understanding of how and why things work, it gives you that much more leverage in any negotiations, which is working on different projects. On that technical side, it really benefits.
Yeah, I think along with that, one way that I kind of started into it a little while ago was, I would just go into the react.js chat and just try to answer questions that were coming in, because there's always like a million questions that people are asking. And a lot of them are, kind of like you can find the answer right there in the README. But some of them were a little more deep, and I didn't know the answer to them. So I would go and try to figure out, I would dig into the source code and find the answer, or maybe it was a bug. And then maybe I would file the bug and try to fix it. But being involved in the community at that level, I was learning a lot by helping others. But I think also people started knowing who I was, at least at that time. And then I started getting offers. People would just message me, "Hey, man, I see that you've been helping a lot of people. You helped me. Can you help me with my project?" And I think that's what Mike was talking about earlier. You get to know some of these startup founders who are kind of technical themselves, but they need someone to help them take it to the next level. And they might be in the community trying to do that. And so if you're there in the community and you're contributing and even if it's just answering questions for people that have them, you'll get noticed, and you can not only learn a lot, but then you can get hooked up and get a lot of good connections. That's how I ended up meeting Gabe, the founder of G2i, and a lot of stuff. I think I worked on a project that Mike worked on, and you just kind of make a lot of connections just by putting yourself out there and communicating with people.
Yeah, I did something similar to that with Stack Overflow when React Native was kind of first getting out, just answering questions. And the value wasn't like my Stack Overflow, like karma going up or whatever that number is. The value I actually found was looking and finding answers that I didn't know the answer to, and actually going and figuring it out and then coming back with the answer and learning something new like every day, just kind of how you were talking about with React-to-Flux. And if you're listening and you're not on React-to-Flux, it's a community that's on Discord with a bunch of different rooms that are particular usually to React, and it's a really good place to go. It's kind of like Slack. If you've never used Discord, you can go on there and not only ask questions, but you can actually like just watch discussions as they happen in real time and learn a lot, and just hang out in there if you kind of have the time, I guess.
Yeah, actually, is there a good resource of finding, besides just using Stack Overflow search, is there some high-profile ways, or is there a place where people are collecting React issues so that people can go solve them? Maybe even higher-profile React issues? I think they had something once for a little while, which drew quite a few people in. Maybe that's something we can kind of bring back.
Yeah, I think was there something, it was called Product Panes back then, but I think it's called Cami now. Do they still have that for React and React Native? I know some other projects are still using it.
Yeah, I don't know. That shows how much we contribute back right now. Too busy. So I have a question just globally to G2i, right? If you could give any advice to somebody who's interviewing with you, right? What would that advice be? I always think that's a fun sort of question, and it's unfair for them to ask once they're actually finally sitting there. But what impresses you specifically to have you say, we're going to place this person?
Hunger for me. Hunger's my thing. And it is kind of the same thing you guys have been talking about. I call it hunger, any passion, whatever. But that's the people who I interview who have that just desire to succeed, desire to learn, desire to grow. Those people stick in my mind, even if they didn't score that high on the code challenge. And we've had that scenario where they made it, but it was an entry level. But they were so hungry every time, we discuss projects and contracts all the time. And every time something comes up, that hungry person's in my mind. I'm thinking, man, they'd be great for this project. Because I met a hungry developer once many, many years ago, and now he runs a podcast and works at Amazon and has written books. So that hunger has served me well over the years. And so that is, for me, that's the thing.
Yeah, I think that's huge too for me. I think also humility. Someone who is also honest that they don't know something, and who perhaps understands that that they can make mistakes, that sometimes they come in late, and when we perhaps sometimes ask questions regarding those things, they give honest answers, and they they give us the reality of who they are, not kind of just bragging about how great they are, but just kind of being themselves, being humble, being modest, and but yeah, in accord with that hunger, that passion, that those are always the people that end up standing out really well.
Very cool. So very clear to you, and then also intelligent and trainable, willing to kind of go on to the next challenge. That's sort of like the high profile people. That's definitely a good call. I think if somebody's intelligent and trainable, you can put them on any project, and that's super cool.
Yeah, that's so true, and those are the ones too that tend to stick with us for a long time and get placed on projects time and time again. Those are the guys that are doing really well, continuing to learn, and kind of some of them are moving on to greater things. Some of the guys that started out doing stuff at G2i are now working on huge companies with giant projects, Apollo, and a lot of things. And not to say that it's because they worked at G2i, but those are the type of people that we're looking for. And I think anyone can kind of be that way, if they put themselves to it.
Nice.
Yeah, I think that's really cool to hear. Because in my relatively short career, like I've totally seen that. Like it's all about the person rather than their skills, I guess. And something I see, because I typically talk with a lot of more entry level developers first, either getting into React Native right now, or just kind of getting into programming in general. And if they're going the route where they want to get a full-time job, start making money programming, a lot of them are really focusing on I need to learn X, Y, and Z before I can even consider working with anyone or charging for my services. But so much of it is just kind of being a decent human and just really being passionate about what you're doing and enjoying that. And it's easier to train the skills for a job rather than kind of like being the right match for that job. So just kind of remembering that, especially for people who are just first getting into this, the skills, especially in JavaScript land, like there's a new thing every week. There's something hot every other month. So like knowing or being the best, I'm putting that in air quotes, at a specific technology or specific framework, whatever. I find that has come, like, it's certainly important, but it comes second to just being like a good person that people enjoy working with, who's a relatively capable developer, someone who can learn something and debug things on these projects they're working on.
Yeah, I can totally second that opinion, especially the community sort of involvement and being just a cool person. Specifically at Callstack and even just the people that I used to work with, we've been looking for those types of person. Not sort of being expert in React or React Native development, because obviously it's hard to find a senior React Native developer around you if the technology is still new. But just people that generally are good team players and just know how to sort of get into the shoes of a client and understand what we have to do, that can get excited about the stuff and just know how to play well with the team. So I totally agree about that, and I feel like this is the most important part about getting a cool gig. Just being a cool person and friendly to everyone, helpful, and honestly, the technical details, like what are, in my opinion, the second plan when you are chatting to a client, especially about the product, because you gotta be sort of a communicative developer in order to understand what you have to do and in order to communicate well with the client. So I feel like this is the most important part, like just being communicative and knowing how to sell. Maybe that sounds bad, but just how to sort of get the product, get the client convinced that you are the right person for this particular job.
So I guess to kind of sum up kind of what we're talking about, what I'm hearing is a combination of like passion, being humble, being eager to kind of work together on a team with people and just be, easy to work with. And I think something else maybe that may help, it may not help you right away, but in the long term it'll help, is just patience. Kind of all of this stuff won't happen overnight. It's one of those things that kind of like accrues over time and snowballs, and then one day you're kind of find yourself in a position where you're able to kind of pick and choose the projects that you have and the rates that you want and the companies that you want to work with. Like over time, you take all this stuff into consideration and you just stay consistent. Consistency in general in life is just so important, but especially in what we're talking about, because you can't just do one thing and expect everyone to notice you. It's going to, maybe if you come out with a library that just blows up, that's the exception, like open source wise. But in general, it's going to be more like a slow process where you just do things every day, every week, every month, and then slowly you start getting the recognition, I guess, that you're looking for. So we're getting kind of close on time. Is there anything that you all think we should kind of go over or cover that we haven't done so yet? Okay, well, I think we'll go ahead and get to the picks. Dave, do you have any picks today?
Yeah, I actually, something I wanted to kind of put out there. There's a kind of an old Ruby conference keynote talk by someone, and it kind of, a quote by Carl Sagan to get a little philosophical. It was, you have to know the past to understand the present. And I think that, a lot of times we really get like hung up in like a lot of the new stuff that's coming out right now, some of, what's going on in the future. And this talk is entitled Architecture, the Lost Years by Robert Martin, also known as Uncle Bob. And he's kind of like a polarizing figure in the development community. Some people love him, some people hate him. But regardless, watching this talk, it's like from 2011, it really kind of changed my perspective on development, on how I look at the software, my perspective was on what I was doing, and I just think it's something that everyone can kind of benefit from, whether you agree with it or not. I think it might be something that can kind of open your eyes to see some of the history of what has happened over the years, and kind of how does that affect you, how does it affect us right now, and the way that you code.
Very cool. We'll definitely have to link to that. I'm planning on watching that now. Lee, do you have any picks?
Yeah. So last podcast, we talked to Sasha Grief, and we talked a lot about the state of JavaScript and stuff, but we also talked about his library, Vulkan.js. After the podcast, I dove into it, and I love it. I'm using it now on a project, full bore, and I just want to re-pick his library, Vulkan.js. I've really enjoyed getting into it. It has rapidly increased the project that I was working on. So it's a combination of React, GraphQL, and Meteor. But it's Meteor through Apollo, not Meteor through Minimongo. So it's really cool.
Spencer, do you have any picks today?
Yeah, I've got two picks. First one is going to be a book I'm reading right now, kind of sticking on the branding side of things. It's called Crushing It by Gary Vaynerchuk. And it's just kind of he gives some kind of tips and everything about personal branding, because he's kind of, at least in my mind, he's like a king of personal branding in the entrepreneurship space. But there's a lot of good case studies in there of other people who have done a good job of personal branding. And if you're looking to kind of go out on your own contracting wise, like that could be a really good just topic, and just either inspiration or just kind of, actual tactical things you can do to kind of build your personal brand so you can more easily get contracting work. And then the other one, also sticking along with this, if you want to find some React Native work, I have that email list. It's at workreactnative.com. Send out an email every Monday with just some React Native related jobs. And if you're interested in that.
Okay. Gant, do you have any picks?
Yeah, I have two picks. First of all, there's a book that was recommended to me by Jamin Holmgren. It's called Made to Stick. It's about making your ideas, why some ideas succeed and other ideas tend to be forgotten. And it's all about the science of what makes some ideas, as they call it, stickier than others. And they've got like a 5-step program to make an idea even stickier. And it's a fantastic book. I've actually learned a little bit about leadership while reading the book as well, which I didn't expect, but it's fantastic so far. I'm about halfway through it. It is made to stick, and it's by Chip Heath and Dan Heath. And my second pick is specifically to influence Mike's picks for sure. Is the obviously September 5th and 6th is the React Native EU conference coming up. They've announced some really awesome speakers, and I know that they have the CFP open. So if you're interested in learning React Native and you want to know about conferences that are coming up, definitely subscribe to their Twitter and check it out, because they're just constantly putting out great content. And hopefully this influences Mike's picks.
All right, Mike, do you have any picks?
So I have 3 picks today. The first one is the MIT license for React Native that has been, the pull request changing that has been merged, I guess, last week. So it's still a fairly new change that will be landing with the next release. For those who've been waiting for that, it's surely an interesting update. I myself don't want to start discussion here whether MIT license is a good choice or not, but just throwing out this information because I know a lot of you were sort of interested in the licensing stuff for the React Native itself. The other pick is that I've just released 3 new versions of React Native as we are doing this podcast, which are 0.23.2, 0.25.3, and 51.1 that basically contain Windows-specific fixes. So if you are not running on React Native Windows, you can easily ignore these updates. They are just meant to sort of fix a few annoying issues with link command for linking Windows-specific native modules. Big thanks to Microsoft and Eric Rosell from their team for working on that and many other improvements. And the last pick that I have, which has been influenced by Gantt, is the Chain React conference, which is happening on July 11th and 13th of this year in Portland. I've been there to this conference last year, and it's been great source of React Native specific content. They have a conference as well. So if you are nearby US or you ever want to travel to US to sort of share your React Native knowledge or talk with React Native developers, you should definitely go there. I've been there last year. I'm going one more time. And it's not just the city that is great, the weather is great, but also the community in thread, James, all the community out there are just amazing. So check the website. It's infinite.thread/chainreactconf, and get your ticket before they get more expensive. And that's it.
Woohoo!
Awesome. We're getting into conference season, and now we have both React Native EU and Chain React to look forward to this year. So that's awesome. Can't wait. So for me, I have 2 picks. One of them I already mentioned. It's The Nomadic Developer. It's a book that I read like 6 years ago or 5 years ago before I started actually doing consulting. It's kind of been a really, really valuable resource for me. I haven't read it in a couple of years, but I read it like 2 or 3 times after I first picked it up, because there was just so much good stuff in there, and it helped me a lot. And it not only helps you get a job as a consultant, it actually helps you just get a job in general, I guess. There's a lot of good information there. It also helps you to know how to deal with people, and you can identify the interests of other people before your own interests, if that makes any sense. It kind of lays out what other people are looking for, so you can kind of try to be that person, I guess. And then my other pick is, I have 2 more picks actually. So I have 3 picks. One of them is Urkel. It's the GraphQL library from Ken Wheeler. He is working on adding subscriptions and optimistic UI so it can be a full-featured GraphQL client. I really like the API. If you're working with GraphQL, you may want to check it out. It may not provide everything that Apollo does right now, but it's getting there. And then my last pick is Unstated. It's the new state management library, and it's from James Kyle, and it does state management in the sense that you can kind of replace Redux or MobX with it, but it sticks more to the React paradigm, so you're not using any new things. You're working directly with JavaScript, and you're working with the React API. So you're working with set state and things like that, which is pretty interesting. And you're basically calling set state, and you have a way to kind of have it as at a higher level or maybe an external level, similar to how you have like a Redux store, a MobX store, and you're just changing it in that one place, and then your whole app is kind of inheriting it. So I kind of like it. I've yet to use it in a real app, but I'm going to do that. So hopefully I'll have some more feedback there, and I can tell you if it actually is something you can actually use in the real world. So, okay, well, that kind of wraps it up. That is episode 88 of React Native Radio. Thanks to everyone for coming on the show, and we'll see everyone next week.